Hi, Mr. Lau. We can't hear you. Can you unmute yourself, please?
Okay, sorry, I was having trouble unmuting myself, but technology is always challenging for me. But mahalo for aloha, everybody. Thank you for having me today. Please call me Ernie, not Mr. Lau or Ernest. Ernie's good. Uh, and I'm honored to be here to be able to share with you our manao about the Vai and the situation with Red Hill, um, and give you an update. And I look forward to questions. Please don't be afraid to ask questions. That's why we're here. I'm gonna, if I could share my screen, I'm gonna share a PowerPoint. Please bear with me. Okay.
As Ernie is getting ready his PowerPoint, we do have a Q&A happening. So I will put that in the chat, and you can actually put in your questions that you want to ask Ernie in there, and you can actually go in and upvote questions and help us to prioritize what questions we want to make sure that we get Ernie to answer this morning, so that it's in the chat. So mahalo nui, Ernie.
Okay, thank you. Can you see my slide?
Perfect, yes.
Okay, got it. Mahalo and aloha, everybody. So we just want to talk today about the impact on the Board of Water Supply. And we'll just start out with this, as this is a presentation that we've used for different groups, community groups, elected officials to, but starting off with some just basic knowledge. So this is kind of a hydrologic cycle related to how it affects our underground aquifers. And for the Board of Water Supply, 100% of our water comes from these underground aquifers. And we don't use water from rivers or streams. All of it is taken out of the ground from these high quality pure aquifers. It starts off, with the evaporation occurring around the ocean around us. It creates clouds as it rises up in the air, and as those clouds pass the Ko'olaus and the Waianae range, we're very blessed because they drop their rain or the ua on these Mauka watershed areas, and it helps to recharge our underground aquifer. The blue here is actually the freshwater. So you can see freshwater exists in dike zones up more at higher elevations, but also floating on saltwater, which permeates underneath the island in the lava rock. You have freshwater floating on top of it. And the reason the freshwater floats on top of it, on top of the saltwater, is a difference in density. Freshwater being lighter in density than saltwater, so it floats on top of it. There is a zone of mixture, which is like where the saltwater and freshwater at the bottom of this underground aquifer, or what we call lens, looks like a lens of water. There's a brackish zone of mixing between the two. What's very important, in addition to the ua, which is the source of our water for Oahu, is the caprock formations around the perimeter of the island. A good part of the perimeter of the island has these caprock formations, which are marine deposits and erosion deposits. Sea level has risen and dropped over time, so it's created this geologic formation, what we call the caprock, which is lower in permeability or not as porous as the lava rock under the island. And so it acts like a dam to allow the freshwater behind it, freshwater originating in the ua, falling on the mountains in Mauka areas, seeping down through the lava rock, and keeps it kind of constrained back. So the amount of freshwater is actually built up to quite a large volume. You can see the line there for sea level, and you can see that the top of the freshwater aquifer actually extends higher than sea level. And what we use is kind of a general rule of thumb for every 1 foot of height of freshwater above sea level, there might be 40 feet of freshwater, around 40 feet of freshwater below it in the that aquifer. The same principle of a freshwater iceberg, which is freshwater floating on a salty ocean. You'll see the tip of the iceberg, but the bulk of the iceberg is actually below the top of the surface of the water. So we're very blessed to have this. Oahu is very unique. We have large aquifer systems, large capacities. So it's allowed really our community to grow on the island of Oahu. We take water from these different portions of the aquifer, the dike zone, which is water that's restrained behind these thin sheets of lava that cooled in cracks as the eruptions were ending that created our island. And they actually become like dams that hold back fresh water behind it. So when we drill a tunnel, which is that dike tunnel into the mountains like Waihe'e, on the Waianaes, we have a couple tunnels in back of Waianae Valley. We have a tunnel in Honolulu. Most of the tunnels are in Ko'olapoko in the Kaneohe area, Kahulu to Kahulu. And these tunnels, when we drill into these dike compartments, fresh water flows freely out of the formation there, and is able to go right into our water system without electricity to require pumping of that water. So it's a very important gravity sources for us. The incline shaft in the middle is something very similar to our halava shaft, where we start at the ground surface and we dig down on an incline to access and dig a tunnel that will actually be into the top of the water table or the top of the aquifer. And it basically skims water off the top of the aquifer, and we are able to pump it out and pump it into our water system. Most of our sources are deep wells. They actually are vertical holes that we dig down deep. We install pumps. We pump from deeper within the aquifer. And in the Honolulu area in particular, because of the caprock formation in the coastal areas of Honolulu, when we drill through the caprock into the freshwater aquifer below, water actually comes on under natural pressure, or what we call artesian pressure. And we have some big pumping stations in Honolulu that are that type of wells. So this is kind of the picture of the Board of Water Supply. Keep in mind, the underground aquifer is not a large cave or cavern that has fresh water in it. It's really in the cracks and crevices of the lava rock itself, which is like a sponge. But remember, this lava rock is also very irregular. So you have things like lava tubes that can allow water to flow quickly over long distances. You have the zone between different lava flows that has a lot of what they call clinker that is also able to transmit water very efficiently. And then also the pore spaces within the lava rock itself. So this is a picture previously on the previous slide, the caprock was shown in yellow. In this case, it's shown in blue, looking from above down onto the island of Oahu. You can see that the caprock area, the light blue areas here, really extend around a good portion of the island, and perhaps mostly developed in the leeward side of the island, but it does exist in different parts. And the aquifer is actually on the interior of the island, where we draw our water from. This is a map from the Commission on Water Resources Management. You've probably seen this before. It identifies for groundwater, what they call the sustainable yield for the island of Oahu. And you can see under the title Island of Oahu, total equals 393.5 MGD. What that says is in total, you could withdraw up to 393.5 million gallons of fresh water a day from the aquifers on Oahu without really degrading the quality of the aquifer. Of course, we probably won't ever develop that much and hopefully our island won't grow as that large that we will need all that water. But that is the total capacity over the island. And what the commission did is they identified different areas for management of that groundwater resources. So in the middle of Oahu, you see the Waipahu Waiava hydrologic unit, and underneath you can see 105 or 105 MGD. So it's the largest on the island. So you can see that Pearl Harbor, which is a combination of that purple, in total is 166 million gallons a day. And at Honolulu, you can see for all that kind of a salmon colored area, pink colored area, 48.5 million gallons a day capable. And unfortunately, in 1940, between 1940 and 1943, the Navy, in preparation for war in the Pacific, they built this huge underground fuel facility, 3.5 miles inland from Pearl Harbor, where their base was. And they built it under the Red Hill Ridge there, or Kapukaki, underground. They built it in place underground. And pretty much all the 20 tanks and most of that pipeline is over our precious aquifer, our freshwater aquifer. In this graphic, we see a rendering in the upper left corner of the 20 tanks. They're vertically oriented, and they basically were built what they called field constructed. So they were built in place by tunneling, digging down into the ridge from above. They dug a vertical hole there, and then in that vertical hole, they connected it to a tunnel down at the very bottom. So what they did was they hollowed out from that vertical shaft from above on the top of the ridge. They started to hollow out the mountain, and they basically built each tank that way. And when the rock that they broke loose, the debris, they took it out through that lower tunnel and took it outside of the facility. So it fell down through the middle and then was hauled out in that lower tunnel. So each tank is 250 feet tall and 100 feet in diameter. You could easily fit Aloha Tower into one of these tanks. And their capacity is just huge. They can hold up to 12.5 million gallons of capacity in each tank. So, when you think about it, that's like the equivalent of a super tanker in each tank. And what's holding the fuel in place is really a 1/4-inch steel liner that was welded together, steel plate, only a 1/4-inch thick. And you can look at your pinky, and it's about the width of your pinky, the thickness of your pinky, looking at it from the side. That's about a 1/4 inch. That's the only thing that really holds the fuel, that 12.5 million gallons of fuel, from leaking out into the environment and contaminating the aquifer below. And that steel plate, we know, is rusting on the outside. It's backed by concrete to provide structural support to the tank. But that steel plate has been corroding over the past nearly 80 years. Downhill, down away from the tanks, about 1/2 mile away, is the Navy's Red Hill shaft, which is the one that was heavily contaminated, is heavily contaminated with petroleum, of different types of fuels, jet fuel and oil, gasoline. And this is what the Navy suspects was pumped into their water systems serving Joint Base Pearl Harbor Hickam. One thing to know about this facility, in that bottom left photo there, the schematic there, looking from the side, you can see the 2 rows of 10 tanks each, these huge tanks, and the bottoms of those tanks are really pretty much around 100 feet directly over our aquifer. Remember, these tanks are built in rock, so it's in the lava rock, and it's only the bottom of the tank is only 100 feet above the aquifer, and that includes all the piping that connects these tanks at the bottom and runs in that lower tunnel that goes all the way down to Pearl Harbor, about 3.5 miles. So you can see this is the lower tunnel. This is their Navy's Red Hill shaft, and it goes all the way down to Pearl Harbor, where they unload and pump fuel all the way uphill, 3.5 miles inland. And then later on there by gravity, because these tanks that are higher elevation, they can flow it by gravity to feed the ships in Pearl Harbor. One thing to note here is that this Navy Red Hill shaft, the pump room that connects it to the tunnel that skims water off the top of the aquifer is actually accessed through the same tunnel carrying the pipelines that carry fuel to and from Pearl Harbor. So you literally walk in this lower tunnel and you can enter the pump room where the Navy's Red Hill shaft is located. And this is kind of looking from above, actually taken from a study that was done by the US Navy back in 2010. They actually did a study to evaluate treatment for Red Hill well or Red Hill shaft in the case that it was contaminated with petroleum. Unfortunately, they did the study, but the Navy never followed through to construct the treatment facility. But you can see that Red Hill shaft is shown here. It's really the pump room or where the pumps are, large pumps are located to pump the water from the aquifer below is located right at where this black dot is at. 2254-01 is the state well number. And you can see that it's actually connected to the same lower tunnel, which is shown in these dashed lines that brings fuel from these tanks. Each of these tanks are numbered and the pipelines are located in this lower tunnel. And it's the same tunnel that's brings the fuel to and from Pearl Harbor. One thing to note, I mentioned earlier that the Red Hill shaft is a source that skims water off the top of the water table. So they dug a tunnel called an infiltration gallery just below the top of the water table so we could draw water from the aquifer, and it's pumped out at this pump room. So this tunnel is in the aquifer itself at the top edge reaches of that aquifer, and it's about a little over 1,000 feet long. But you can see the orientation of this infiltration gallery on this map. It's showing it pretty close to the location of the pipelines carrying fuel to and from Pearl Harbor. In fact, this lower tunnel is actually about 80 to 100 feet above this infiltration gallery. So one thought, and we're waiting anxiously for the investigative report to be issued by the Navy and hopefully unredacted version be released to the public, that the leaks occurred in locations that are very close above the infiltration gallery for their drinking water source. So that may have been the reason why the source is now so heavily contaminated with fuel. And the Navy sent divers into this, into the shaft itself, into this tunnel, and they had to basically, they were in there to try to skim and recover some of the fuel that was in this tunnel, on the water and in the water. They actually could see fuel floating on top of the water in this shaft here. And so it's really heavily contaminated. By the way, too, remember this is an 80-year-old facility, and in the early days, there wasn't a lot of environmental laws. So when the Navy would clean out the tanks or the pipelines, they had all this waste product, waste oils and fuel, and they basically discharge it along this tunnel here. This is adit number 3, and they dumped it into an unlined hole in the ground right here called the oily waste pit, oily waste disposal site. And basically for years, they were just, dumping fuel and different types of chemicals that were used for the cleaning of the tanks and pipelines in this unlined hole in the ground. This became a Superfund cleanup site in the past. Okay, this is looking down from about maybe 10,000 feet above. You can see Halava Valley here. These white structures or white buildings here is the Halava Correctional Facility, the state's prison. This is the quarry area, the Hawaiian Cement Quarry. You can see the H3 freeway here. And what this map shows is a location of the 20 tanks, these black dots, 2 rows of 10. And this outline in black is actually the Navy property there, or their parcel that they own. You can also see with this blue dot, the Navy's drinking water source, and you can see how close it is, about a half a mile away from the tanks. But the field pipelines run very close to that drinking water source. You can also see to the north, our closest Board of Water Supply, or BWS wells, IAEA wells, our Halava wells, our Halava shaft, and our what you can see on our IAEA Gulch wells, which is near the top of this map. Down at the bottom is also our Mauna Loa wells. And right now, the 5 nearest BWS wells are tested weekly. We've actually been testing those 5 wells for about 8 years since we first learned about the situation. At least I learned about it in 2014. And we haven't had any field detections, thank goodness, ever since. 3 wells are shut down as a precaution. Our Halava well, Halava shaft, one of our largest sources for urban Honolulu, our IAEA and Halava wells that serve the IAEA Halava water system. 2 Navy wells are shut down, the Navy's Red Hill shaft, and they have another source near the beginning of IAEA town. I think it's around this area here that they've also shut that down as a precaution. Red Hill shaft is contaminated. But this is our concern. Our concern, can leaks from the tanks or the pipelines reach underground in the aquifer? Because the Navy and the Board of Water Supply, we tap basically the same aquifer. The analogy is like we drink from the same cup. On one side of the cup, on the Red Hill side, you have the Navy straw with their taking water from the aquifer. On the other side is our Halava shaft and our other IAEA Halava wells. And the concern is because the aquifer is connected, physically connected, and groundwater can flow underground and transport fuel contamination that may emanate from this fuel facility and carry it in directions that we're concerned about. So that's why we're shutting down our sources as a precaution, because I still remember it was the weekend after Thanksgiving, November 28th, and Kathleen alerts me, I think it was around 6 or 7 in the evening on Sunday, that our control center here at Beretania, which operates 24/7 to monitor and control our water system island-wide, they were receiving calls from customers or people that were complaining that they smelled fuel in their drinking water coming out of their taps in their homes, and they could taste the fuel. And it turned out, those were the poor Navy families. Their water system had been contaminated, and they were exposed to fuel contaminated water directly in their homes. I'll tell you just we've had to deal with crisis, and this is a new crisis. So we've all been in the pandemic for over 2 years now, I think. We've been dealing with the pandemic and trying to continue to operate and maintain our water system for our community. And then now this crisis occurs. It's like right now we're dealing with multiple crises at the same time. And this Red Hill situation is so awful. It's an environmental disaster. It is something that could have been prevented. We've been speaking out on this issue to try to protect our aquifer, our precious Wai, for 8 years. And unfortunately, nobody heard us or wanted to do anything. So now we're in this unfortunate situation, this very terrible situation. I mentioned earlier about the the groundwater, groundwater is usually always moving in the underground aquifer, and typically it starts, from Mauka at the highest rainfall areas in the watersheds up there in Mauka, and then flows toward the ocean. So Mauka to Makai. And that's what the Navy's maintained, that if they are pumping their Red Hill shaft, which is the Navy supply well right here, that they would draw, that the groundwater flow direction, like indicated by these blue arrows here, would be drawing all the groundwater flow toward their well. And any leaks out of this facility would just be drawn and taken up at their Red Hill well. Well, I mean, they've proven part of that true by what's happened to Joint Base Pearl Harbor Hickams water system. But our concern is that there's actually in the ground, underground, in the aquifer with the groundwater flow, that there is a flow direction also across Halava Valley. And based on field data collected, coordinated by the United States Geological Survey, the USGS, and working with the Navy, the Board of Water Supply, and DLNR, the field data collected seems to indicate there is a flow direction across Halava Valley, not only from Mako to Makai, like what the Navy's blue arrows show here, but these red lines, these red arrows indicate from the field data that there's a flow, and you can see Halava shaft right here. So that is our concern right now. Releases of fuel that may come from this facility and it will get into the groundwater. It could flow across the valley and spread, and not just flow from Mauka to Makai. And what the Navy did as part of the administrative order and consent. So back in 2015, remember the first leak that was reported was that I became aware of was in 2014. Front tank number 5, about 27,000 gallons. And because of that, the EPA, the Department of Health, the US Navy, and the Defense Logistics Agency, they signed this voluntary agreement to work together to try to address how to upgrade the facility and to prevent leaks, to protect the environment. Something called the Administrative Order and Consent. As part of that efforts, one of the scope of work items that requires the Navy to do these groundwater flow models to try to determine the groundwater flow direction under different pumping scenarios. And in this case, in this scenario, the Red Hill shaft, the Navy source is off. The BWS Halava shaft is pumping at 12 million gallons a day. So in this model, which is these computer models are using the groundwater flow models the Navy developed. They basically are what they call particle track models. So a particle of fuel that emanates, and in this case, you can see this is a forward track. So it emanates from the point, the source of the contamination to a receptor, which is in this case, wells that are pumping or springs that are flowing. That each of these colored lines represents a computer model run for their particle track models. And you can see clearly that there are model runs that show a particle of fuel that leaks out of this facility could eventually make it over to Halava shaft. There is some additional work that they need to do called fate and transport modeling to make the final determinations. But this is clearly telling us that what the Navy's own reports submitted in 2020 to the regulators indicates, at least for the particle tracks, that there's a potential flow direction, flow lines that could reach as far west as Kalawao Springs, where Sumida Watercress Farm is located near Pearl Ridge. It also could affect our Halava shaft. It could reach they mislabeled this, but we believe this is our Halava well. And this is, they haven't labeled this, but we think this is our IAEA wells. And then this area that was redacted from the report, we think this is their Red Hill shaft location. You can see clearly the particle tracks, lead in up to this area. And also this is their IAEA Halava shaft. We think this is at their other source that they have also as a precaution shut down. So based on this and using the precautionary principle, we realized that we have no choice but to shut down and not pump from the aquifer from these 3 wells. And that has impacted the supply that's available to our water system. And we're going to start to really feel the effects this coming summer. But under this scenario, this does not look good. That fuel leaks from this facility can spread far beyond the limits of the Navy property and affect other areas of our aquifer. This is, of course, the caveat here. I'm still waiting for the final comments from the Department of Health and EPA on this groundwater flow model. They indicated that it was going to come out at the end of the last year, but we're still waiting. Hopefully they'll come out with something soon. Now step back. Okay, so I didn't mention this earlier. The contamination of the water system right now only affects the Navy's water system for Joint Base Pearl Harbor Hickam, serving about 93,000 people, residents, contractors, Navy personnel on the base and in base housing. The Navy operates their own water system there for Joint Base Pearl Harbor Hickam. It has three water sources to supply the base: Red Hill Shaft, their Aya Halava Shaft, and their Waiava Shaft over in the Pearl City industrial area. And basically right now, the Navy's water system is down to 1 source remaining that's operational, only their Waiava Shaft to supply the entire Joint Base Pearl Harbor Hickam, which stretches from the west as far as the Waiava Shaft at Pearl City industrial area near Pearl Highlands Shopping Center, all the way to the east around Pu'uloa Road, and all the way out, including Hickam Air Force Base going Makai, all the way down to Pearl Harbor. So entire naval Pearl Harbor Base, Ford Island, it does, and Hickam Air Force Base. It also does serve the Iroquois Point area, which is across the mouth of Pearl Harbor, and the Iroquois Eva Beach area. They're still on the Navy's water system. So that's the Navy system, 93,000. Now let's step back and talk about the Board of Water Supply. What our kuleana, our responsibilities are. We serve 1 million people on the island of Oahu with drinking water every day. On average, we have to produce 145 million gallons to meet our needs of our community. The water systems, the infrastructure is vast. We have our tunnel sources and up Mauka and the mountains, and then we also have shafts like Halava Shaft. And like I mentioned earlier, a lot of deep wells, wells that we pump water from the underground aquifer. In Central Oahu, we have unfortunately been treating for legacy pesticide contamination from large scale pineapple and sugar cultivation in the past. Still now 30 plus years, going on 40 years, we're treating it for removing some of those chemicals by using activated carbon filters. We also have 171, actually it's 172 water tanks island-wide to store water. We store about 200 million gallons of water in these tanks, and it's there for disasters, but it's also there to meet peak demands when we don't have enough pumping capacity to keep up with the demand. We can actually draw water from these storage tanks that are fully enclosed, holding potable water, and to meet the peak demands of our customers during the day, and also to fight fires. Some people that live up in the ridges like Makakilo and the Makakilo area, high up on, our water source is actually on the plains of Eva. We pump water, and in Waipahu, and we have to pump water uphill to serve those customers. So those are booster pumps. 2,100 miles of water mains island-wide, and 170,000 customers that we serve. Now for the Honolulu water system. In particular, this is the concern because it's the water system that's impacted by this Red Hill situation. Like I mentioned earlier, Halava Shaft, we've shut that down as a precaution because imagine what just picture what the poor Navy families are experiencing right now, and what they experienced. They basically had fuel contaminated drinking water right out of their taps in their homes, and they were exposed to it, either drank it or bathed with it. They were exposed and they felt the health effects. And that's only the Navy's water system, which is a much smaller water system than the Board of Water Supply. But picture now the scenario where if we kept pumping Halava shaft, and in the underground aquifer, Red Hill was still there, and we drew fuel contaminated water from that aquifer, and we pumped it into the water system. These blue lines represent the pipelines that stretch all the way out to Hawaii Kai. These blue lines represent the pipes and how we get water to the residents, to the businesses, to the hospitals, to the schools across this community. And if we had pumped, say, 20 million gallons of fuel contaminated water Halava shaft, it could flow anywhere within this whole pipeline network all the way out to Hawaii Kai. And we would have, it would be a disaster. In Honolulu, so that's why we have these wells closed, because we cannot risk, the risk is too great if we kept pumping. And I cannot risk exposing the customers in the system, which is it's probably over 400,000 people that live in these communities. So this is the water system that serves the lower elevations of coastal areas. Honolulu, in the past, when it first developed, we had enough wells within Honolulu to meet the demands of Honolulu. We had our Kalihi, Beretania, Wilder Wells, Kamiki pump stations are some of our largest in Honolulu. But Honolulu's demand for water has grown beyond our capacity for the sources within Honolulu to meet its needs. So we had to go out west to the Pearl Harbor area, to the Pearl Harbor Aquifer, Halava shaft being representing about 20% of our supply. And then off to the left of this map are other large wells to Pununani, Kalawao wells, Hikuwaiao, that also pump water and bring it through large pipes and bring water into Honolulu every day. So this is our situation. The Navy also was required as part of the AOC to assess the risk of this field facility for releases or leaks. And this is what they came up with. They did a quantitative analysis, and I believe they used a methodology that is applied toward nuclear facilities to assess the risk, a quantitative risk analysis. And they came on, these are some of their findings, that the Red Hill Fuel Facility has a 27% probability of a sudden release between 1,000 and 30,000 gallons of fuel each year. A greater than a 34% chance of a release more than 120,000 gallons of fuel in the next 100 years, a 5% probability of more than a 1 million gallon fuel release in the next 100 years. And every year, this report found that there are releases almost 6,000 gallons a year that are leaking out of this facility, the tanks of the pipes, without the Navy's ability to detect it, because it's lower than their sensitivity of their equipment to detect these leaks. So that is, in our minds, this is a unacceptable level of risk for this facility. In the records or the studies that was submitted as part of the ALC indicates about 72 releases, almost 200,000 gallons of releases over the nearly 80-year life of this facility. And you can see here, 2014, March 2020 at Pearl Harbor at Kilo Pier from a pipeline, and in May 2021. Let me pause there and talk a little bit about that one. Pressure surge releasing approximately 1,600 gallons of jet fuel from supply piping in the lower access tunnel. I think the Navy is now thinking about revising this to a higher number, perhaps 19 or 20,000 gallons. What a pressure surge in that fuel pipeline. Remember, there's 3.5 miles of fuel pipeline that carries fuel to and from Pearl Harbor to Red Hill. This fuel pipeline is of different sizes. Smallest of being 16 inches in diameter, 18 inches, and the largest being 32 inches in diameter. Single wall welded steel pipe. So in May, and I believe this is around May 6th, they had something called a pressure surge. They experienced a pressure surge. Basically, they had the equivalent of like a water hammer a pressure surge in that pipe, and it caused that 16-inch pipe carrying JP5 to blow apart near tank number 20 and also crack open and near tank 18. That pressure surge is like a water hammer that you may experience in your home and your plumbing. If you have your faucet open full bore, wide open, then you suddenly quickly shut it off. Sometimes you'll hear your pipes, your plumbing in the wall actually rattle. And that's because all that water flowing out carries energy and suddenly and momentum, and you're suddenly now stopping that flow direction. So it's going to create what they call a water hammer or pressure transient or pressure surge that'll reverberate back and forth through the pipeline, through the pipes, and cause it to rattle and make noises. In this case, it caused a 5-foot section of pipe, and I've seen it with my own eyes, having gone into the tunnel in mid-December with Congressman Kahele and Case with the Navy. A 5-foot section of pipeline just blew out of its mounts right near the bottom of tank number 20. And it released what we think between 19 to 20,000 gallons, perhaps in 50 seconds. So when I kind of converted that and tried to think of it, because I'm an engineer at the Board of Water Supply, I think about MGD, million gallons a day, or gallons per minute, GPM. I tried to figure out, okay, well, what would it look like in terms of gallons per minute? And it came out to around 24,000 gallons a minute was released. That was the flow rate. So when sometimes, people with their cars, they hit a fire hydrant and you create this geyser of water that may rise 100 feet or 80 feet in the air. That might be, say, 2,000 gallons. Just imagine 12 fire hydrants right next to each other were suddenly knocked off the pipe and broke open, and that water came spraying out of it or gushing out of it into a geyser. 24,000 gallons a minute. So they lost 19 to 20,000 in 50 seconds. When I looked at the pipeline, the steel pipe, this welded steel pipe is a rigid structure. They showed me that it moved because of this pressure surge. The whole part of the pipeline near tank number 20 actually moved 8 inches to one side. And that caused the other pipe to fail and be broken loose and slam against the side of the tunnel, the concrete in the tunnel. So they came very close to a catastrophic failure that could have released potentially, if the break location on that pipe was before the valve was located that would be able to shut off the flow from tank number 20, which tank 20 was the one that released the bulk of the jet fuel. The whole contents of tank 20, perhaps 10 to 12 million gallons, could have flowed into that lower tunnel and they wouldn't have been able to stop it. That would have been a catastrophic event. In September, the Navy, and they didn't tell the health department, but they suffered these pressure surges or pressure transients in the pipelines, in the fuel pipelines in that lower tunnel again. And because of that, they were so concerned, they shut the facility down for 9 days as they were investigating it. Then around November 20th, a electric train, which runs on steel rails in that lower tunnel, which carries men and equipment and materials for the maintenance of the facility, 3.5 miles. It hit a drain line off a AFFF firefighting foam system drain line, and release what they estimate is maybe 14,000 gallons. And Significance of this too is that it released in that lower tunnel at a location very close to Red Hill Shaft to the infiltration gallery. And we think that's why that you can actually feel dripping off the walls of in that drinking water source and floating on the top of the water table there. So what does it mean for the Board of Water Supply and our customers? The story, the information, I just want to be very upfront with you folks, and I want to let you know what you need to know. I'm not going to say things that would make you necessarily will always make you happy, but the reality is that for our Honolulu metropolitan water system, which stretches from the Halawa Mauna Loa area all the way out to Hawaii Kai, we lost 20% of our source supply. For the AIA, with the closure of AIA and Halawa wells, for that AIA 277 system, which serves customers, including Palimomi Hospital and Pearl Ridge Shopping Center, we lost about 50% of our supply. So this is going to be a real challenge as we head into the summers. Water usage, we know, is very related to weather. So during the cooler, drier, cooler, wetter months in the winter times, our winter, which is usually cooler and wetter, water usage goes down because people don't have to use as much water. They don't irrigate as much their lawns and their landscaping. What we see is it's during the summer months where it's hot and dry that water use peaks during the summer months. So it's going to be, our challenge is going to be this coming summer and every summer going forward. And these two water systems, especially the Honolulu Metro Water System, Metropolitan Honolulu Water System, and this Aiea Halawa system, that we're going to be struggling to make sure our supply is able to meet the demand of water or the water use by our customers. If the supply is less than the demand, and it's going to be a real balancing act here, then what's going to happen, what we're going to see happening in those water tanks, remember those water tanks that we have up in the hills, those fully enclosed tanks, well, we'll see the water level in those tanks will stay low and start to drop down. So what some of our customers may start to see is lower water pressure at their homes or businesses. And then when those tanks go dry, that means the demand for water is greater than the supply. There may be areas of our water system that may even run out of water for periods of time. So that we're going to need everybody's kuleana, especially if you live in the Honolulu water system, Honolulu area, and in the Aiea Halawa area, to conserve water, to use only what you need and to not waste it. And when we come out with the request that people may have to, we may come out with a request and say people need to cut their usage by 10%, by 20%, or 30%. And we're going to be doing it because we want to make sure that all customers will be able to have water. If not, there will be some customers, and that could include some really critical facilities that could be challenged to even having enough water to operate or to use in their homes. So we're going to start off with voluntary requests for water conservation, especially in these areas. And if that is not enough, then we may have to exercise mandatory restrictions on water usage. And this is just to take care of our existing customers in these served by these water systems. They're nearly over 400,000 people. All the businesses, the hotels, the hospitals, the schools that are fed by the system. We're going to need everybody's kokua to cut back on their water usage and to fix their leaks right away. And if necessary, we may have to implement more stricter, more rigid, stringent restrictions on water usage. So that's existing customers. At the same time, Honolulu continues to grow. And there are requests for new water meters, which translates into higher water usage. that is being added to our water system. So we're kind of looking at how do we do that? How do we take care of our existing customers in the system, but also how do we handle demand for new water meters, new water usage in our system? And because if the supply is outstripped by the demand for water, then people will run out of water at times, and that is not a good situation. So that is kind of the challenges that we're looking at right now. We will be communicating with the community, with you folks, and we'll be sharing this message, island-wide to all our customers. But we are in this crisis situation. And there are on our boardofwatersupply.com, there are easy ways or suggestions for water, saving water. And these are some of the 7 easy steps to save water, including taking shorter showers. In summary, the Board of Water Supply, we've shut down 3 sources in response to the petroleum contamination. And the Navy shut down 2 sources. Our position is that the Red Hill tanks need to be emptied as soon as possible, as soon as safely possible. It needs to be defueled, and the Navy should not be allowed to bring the fuel back. The risk is so real and immediate that they need to really just relocate the fuel storage at locations. If they need storage, fuel storage on Oahu, build above ground storage tanks on Navy property over the Caprock area where it won't affect the drinking water aquifer directly. Relocate the fuel to their base or onto private suppliers that can store the fuel safely for them, or move it to other locations, maybe even outside of Hawaii. But do not bring it back to Red Hill. We will need to promote conservation, and we'll communicate with our community on what's happening. And of course, Board of Water Supply right now, if you feel that's, as I've been sharing this, that something in your heart says, maybe Board of Water Supply is someplace that I'd like to look to see to join the Ohana here at the BWS, where our mission is to care for our vai and to supply the needs of our community with pure, fresh water into their homes. We are looking for people that would like to join our Ohana, our team here, to carry on this mission of protecting our vai and ensuring that Board of Water Supply, the services we provide will continue forever for our community. BWS was created in 1929. We used to be under the city government itself at the time, but in the late 1920s, the territorial legislature saw that political decisions or short-term thinking as it affects our drinking water systems, our drinking water infrastructure, is not a good thing, because kawai ola, water is life and it's essential for our community. So they created the Board of Water Supply and made us what we call semi-autonomous in 1929. So we are under an independent board that controls all our finances, sets water rates, sets policies, and also determines long-term plans for the direction, the maintenance of our water systems, our infrastructure island-wide. It's a very important governance model for our community. And I would say that this governance model has allowed me to be very outspoken on this issue of Red Hill for the last 8 years. And, that's important, because sometimes, we don't, traditionally, I think government has been one that you rarely find one government entity criticizing another government entity. But in this case, when it comes to protecting our vai, it's important that we are able to speak the truth, even if it may be unpopular. But I thank you for the opportunity to talk to you.
Mahalo Anui Loa, Ernie, for your presentation. I'm going to pass it to Kumuka'i, who is in charge of the Q&A.
Aloha. So, Kalamai, we were having a little bit technical difficulty. So if you posted a question, it probably did not save. So please repost it to this link, and I will start sharing the questions. And go ahead and feel free to upvote questions so we know that's the one that we want to hit before we're done with this session. So I have this question from PKL. Now that the military is fighting the emergency order once again to empty their fuel tanks, what recourse, if any, do we have? Does the fact that they are jeopardizing our water supply and ultimately our lives have any weight when it comes to forcing them to comply?
Yeah, so the Navy is challenging us. They're taking us to court. Department of Health, the Board of Water Supply, the Sierra Club. We're going to court in both the state court and the federal court. A reporter last year asked me the question about, do I trust the Navy? And my response, I had to kind of really think about it, was, trust is earned. Unfortunately, with that order, their challenges, then this is their second round of challenges to the Department of Health's emergency order, which we support. They are rapidly losing trust, and they're not trying to regain trust. What people can do, and I've said that, and I've said this, I think from the very beginning, that we're in a marathon on this issue. We're not in a sprint. So although they had a situation that jeopardized the lives of their own personnel, of their own military families served by the base, it's very apparent that the decisions, go all the way back, to the Pentagon, to Washington, that although they've seen the terrible stories that come forward from their own customers, that hasn't touched their heart to the place where they recognize that, which is more important, fuel or water, that water is actually more important. If you don't have a supply of safe drinking water, even if though you have fuel, you can't survive. You can't operate the base. This unfortunately is typical of what I expected from them, having dealt with them for the last 8 years. So what can people do? What can you do? And like I've said, it's important that we all speak with one voice. We don't have to be 100% in agreement on every little detail, but we have to speak with one voice. Defuel the facility and relocate and shut down the facility, move the fuel storage elsewhere where it won't impact our aquifer, but get it out of there. And we need to be of the same mind at the city level, state and federal level. So what can you do? You can let your elected officials know where you stand. And right now, because this is a federal facility and it's dealing with the largest federal agency in our country, our congressional delegation is extremely important. Their voice in Congress carries more weight than Ernie Lau complaining and grumbling and talking, trying to make the issue that this is not acceptable. It really is going to be our congressional delegation to ensure that there is adequate funding, that the Navy, if they don't willingly agree to defuel and decommission this facility, that through Congress, they can pass a law to do that, to set the policy for the DoD when it comes to this facility. So our congressional delegation, and you're part of their constituency, please, they are trying to listen, and they're trying to do their best. But we need them to keep the pressure on because this is a marathon. This will not end overnight. It won't end in a month. It will go on for a while. But we cannot relent. We have to stay together and keep with one voice the same message. Empty out the fuel tanks, decommission the facility, relocate the fuel. Don't bring it back.
Hello, Nui, for that answer. So you heard those suggestions, so go out and do them. It's we do have a sense of urgency. So after Red Hill, this is from Professor Kelani Cook. After Red Hill, what is the biggest threat to our water supply?
I would say climate change creates an uncertainty on where the future will be. We've done different climate. We've done a vulnerability assessment working with the Water Research Foundation, a national organization, to assess our vulnerabilities. And one of the vulnerabilities come from like sea level rise impacting our infrastructure. Need to make changes to our infrastructure, especially our pipelines in the coastal areas, and where we go with the if there is a managed retreat, relocation of the highways more inland, then we'll have to move all that infrastructure inland with the highways. But the source of supply, remember the UO falling on our watersheds, our Malka watersheds, is really the source of our drinking water. Changes to climate and changes to rainfall, that is the biggest threat. I would say the second biggest threat is using Red Hill as an example it's ourselves. It's people and what we do. And the kind of activities that we do over the aquifer and the potential that we could contaminate the aquifer. My staff, Mr. Oren Kawata, keeps on reminding me, this is about, Red Hill was about prevention for the last 8 years. And unfortunately, now we're in a reactionary mode. But we need to kind of break that cycle that we are only reacting to things. We need to be more proactive and seek to prevent threats. So I say climate change. I would look at second is making sure that our activities with the potential that this supply could become more limited and even more precious in the future, that we should manage it well, protect it and cherish it, and leave it in a pristine condition for future generations.
Mahalo nui. We have an anonymous question. How can we bring attention to this issue? It seems that things are only addressed when they are national news stories and protests. I think you addressed some of that, but if you had any more to add.
Yeah, I don't really have any more to add. We've tried to do everything we can. The one thing we've found through this emergency, this situation, is spreading understanding, spreading the knowledge about the situation, creating greater awareness in the community, throughout the community. It's really one way to draw more attention to this issue, because it becomes, instead of one voice, Ernie Lau's voice, it becomes many voices in our community and expressing the concern, so that it becomes impossible to ignore. So anyway, just add that.
Okay, we have another question. Is the system of flushing contaminated water safe? Can the flush contaminated water negatively impact people, animals, and the environment that comes into contact with it?
So the flushing of the water, is something that's between the Navy and the Department of Health and the EPA. And the Navy is treating that water before they discharge it into a lava stream. And hopefully the test will indicate that the level of contaminants in that remain in the water is not going to have a negative effect on the environment, but I'm not sure. We have requested data. We want to see the data before the water coming out of Red Hill Shaft, which is contaminated with fuel, as it goes into these large tanks containing the carbon and the clay, and then what is the quality, and then what is the quality coming out of the tanks after the treatment before it gets discharged into the environment. So that will be the responsibility of the Navy and the Department of Health to monitor. Whether it's safe, I guess the Department of Health has determined it to be so, and has given the Navy a MPDS permit to do this.
Another question from Dr. Kelani Cook. How long do we expect to have to filter water in the central area? And did the major planters up there ever have to pay any compensation?
Right now, this contamination was discovered in I think the 80s. So since the 80s, we've been having to treat the water every day in the water sources in central Oahu and near Waipahu and Kunia areas. So we expect that it'll continue. For how long, we don't know. The concentrations are not coming any lower. In fact, some of the locations, the concentrations of the contaminants seem to be going higher. Did the planters ever pay compensation? This happened when I wasn't here. I believe there was a lawsuit and a settlement with the chemical companies that manufactured the pesticide, but I don't recall how much it was.
Another question from Eric, inquiring about how would mandatory water restrictions be enforced?
That's a good question, because remember, we have thousands of customers in these water systems. So how do we monitor it? Oh, my staff and will be we go out every day into the community to do different types of work, read meters, check for leaks, do repairs and maintenance on the water system. So definitely, if we get into a mandatory restrictions, I'm going to ask them to be kind of my eyes and ears. But it really is going to be a challenge to enforce the mandatory restrictions. Although what we might do is if somebody repeatedly, after we ask them nicely to stop wasting the water or turn off their irrigation system, which is running when it's raining, then there may be ability for us to restrict their water meter or even shut off the water meter if it's egregious. But it will be a challenge. In my time at the Board of Water Supply, and I started in BWS in 1980, there was a period of time of prolonged multi-year drought. I think it went to about 5 years. And we had to implement mandatory water restrictions, like irrigating your yard on odd or even days, depending on your address. And when we put out the indications of mandatory restrictions, we saw an immediate drop of around 20% on water usage island-wide. So that was promising that people would be responsible and comply with the restrictions. But this will be a challenge.
And then just going to ask TD to unmute, and she should be able to ask her question.
Hi, Mr. Lau. So I read the plan, the RHS RMP. I'm trying to do some homework on the situation at hand. And it looks like the proposition is not, the construction plan is not going to maybe start until the federal fiscal year 24-25. I know you did mention budgeting and all the processes that need to be in place before they actually move forward. So due to the situation at hand, does the BWS have a long-term plan? In course, should it not be resolved before this time frame? And is the Department of Water Supply still be able to fulfill the demands of the island?
Yeah, so when you mean TD, what WP construction plan, is that the water treatment plan of the Navy that's approved by the regulators?
Correct.
Okay. I don't believe I've seen the construction plan, but say they are given to that time frame. We've already starting the implementation strategy development to respond to this crisis. We do have a water master plan that we did in 2016 that looked forward, 30 years into the future. This Red Hill situation, we did acknowledge it, but we didn't until we're getting into the crisis itself and realize what wells we have to shut down. Now we're having to now in more detail determine how do we make up the loss of supply. And that's what we're doing right now. So we'll be coming out with a bunch of exploratory well drilling in different locations outside what we feel comfortable is going to be outside the area of influence of any contamination from the Red Hill field facility. So those wells, hopefully within the next, the process for planning and engineering is starting right now. But hopefully we get into drilling later this year for these wells that will replace supply capacity. We're also going to be drilling monitor wells in Halava Valley. And the board approved an amendment to our CIP a month ago to allow us to proceed with drilling these monitor or test wells in Halava Valley to try to look for contamination of the underground aquifer and determine if it's migrating across the valley. So we hope to get 2 wells started this year, drilling those 2 wells. We are also in discussions with the EPA and the Department of Health about locations of these different test wells to try to determine the nature and extent of the contamination. Meeting the supply, it will be challenging, TD, because a new well source on our system, you start off with an exploratory well, and then if you find that after doing the test, pumping test of that well, determine the capacity and the quality of the water, then you design and construct a production well facility. And usually that takes, I would say 5 to 10 years, depending on how difficult it is. So we are in a very challenging situation right now.
Thank you.
So we are at 10:50. I know that we do have a few more questions. This is one that got upvoted. So what are the biggest consumers of water in Hawaii? And just a mahalo for looking out for the people of Hawaii.
Oh, mahalo. It's our job. The biggest consumers, like in the Honolulu water system, actually are like the city and county of Honolulu is one of the biggest users. State of Hawaii also, which includes the schools, all the schools in the system. They're also a large water user, and some of the hotels actually make it into that category. So federal government, well, actually federal government in terms of water use of the resource, the Navy being the biggest federal agency using water. But we'll be working with these larger customers. We've reached out already to the Department of Parks and Recreation with the city and county of Honolulu to look at leak detection on the major parks within the Honolulu water system, to ask them to fix their plumbing and reduce waste. We'll be reaching out to the Department of Education to also do the same for the schools within the Honolulu and Aiea Halava system. But I thank you for the opportunity to speak before you. I'm sorry if I seem a little confusing, but please feel free to send me questions. I'll be glad to reach out and get back to you.
Mahalo nui, Ernie. I'm just posting these that are saying that are kind of giving you that kako'o that they support you and the work that you do. But thank you so much, everyone, for joining us this morning with Ernie. And I hope that we are able to incite everyone in their own way to take those steps to conserve our water, to share this information out with our family, because like Ernie said, it takes all of us, a whole community. We got to pull hands together, kako'o each other, and remind ourselves about conservation and how do we safeguard our water systems. So thank you so much, Ernie, for the time that you have taken out of your very busy day to talk story with us at University of Hawaii at West Oahu and all of our community members. We cannot thank you enough for all of the very important and invaluable work that you do. Mahalo nui. You folks can unmute and say thank you and tell Ernie bye if you want. But mahalo nui.
Mahalo
Awesome.
nui, Ernie.
Mahalo nui.
Thank you. Bye. Mahalo, Ernie.
Asa.
Mahalo,
Asa.
Ernie.
Mahalo. Mahalo.
Mahalo.
Oh,
Mahalo, right? Have a good day.
Thank you.
Mahalo. And
Together
then
we
also thank you for your team who keeps you going and gets you to the right places. So
can. Thank you, everybody. Mahalo and be safe, please.
mahalo
Kawai
nui.
ola ola ikawai.
ola ikawai.
Mahalo.
Protect the
Hola.
vai. Protect the vai. We're not gonna give up. We're not gonna give up.
Yeah, we'll continue. We'll continue to keep trying to raise awareness and probably we'll be in touch with you again to maybe have another talk.
Anytime,
But
Caillou.
this was really great. Thank you so much.
Mahalo, everybody. Aloha.
Mahalo, aloha. Ohiho. Yep.
Ohiho.
Mahalo, everyone. Aloha.
Mahalo.
Mahalo, Pete Kia.